Yo team, what's up? I just wanted to jump on here today and bring you through our macro hater guide training to counting macros. All right, so there's a couple things about this training. One, this is going to be really important if you're an athlete that has not really gotten into tracking macros before. Maybe you haven't really experienced it. Maybe you've kind of dabbled in it, but never really got that deep into it. This would be a really good first pass through to kind of understand the ins and outs of it, to understand why we do it and why it's important. But then also for athletes that may have done it before, done it successfully, it doesn't hurt to go through a training like this because there's going to be a lot of little nuggets that you probably weren't aware of, or little strategies here and there that you might pick up that could actually be a game changer for you. It might actually help it make the whole tracking thing a little bit easier for you, because we know that one of the biggest drawbacks when it comes to tracking is just how damn time consuming it is and how it takes up so much of your attention and focus. So yeah, let's just dig into it. This is actually a pretty long training. I think it's 26 pages altogether. So I'm only going to cover some of the high level pieces of this training with you today on the video. But I would suggest that you either go through this yourself or follow along and then just pause and dig through some of the more detailed points. So I always kind of want to start this training by talking about how I used to hate fucking macros. I hated them. Even as a nutrition coach, I kind of got to, when I first started, I really want to be like, oh, you don't have to do it. You can eat successfully without having to do any of that stuff. You don't have to track. And, there's a good way to reach your goals without having to track and that kind of stuff. But as I got some experience under my belt, I kind of realized that macros is just a tool, right? It's a tool that helps us get to where we want to be. And it's a really powerful tool at that. And I think where a lot of people, and especially myself, got hung up on was that we thought that macros is kind of like the means to an end, right? That, okay, if you're going to be tracking, you just have to track forever, right? But I think as I kind of got some experience with it, I realized that it's more of a time-bound thing, right? And that's where I've kind of changed my tune around macros, is that it's really, really powerful, and it's a really good way to get exactly where you want to be and understand exactly what's going into your body and make those really small changes that can make a really big impact. So essentially where I kind of get, my framework for macros is that it's really time-bound, and that I don't like the idea of having to count macros forever. That's one thing that repulses me. But I think it's really powerful when done at the right time and right intervals. So, for example, 3 months, you have 3 months to get from point A to point B with your body. But then once you've gotten there, you either maintain what you've been doing or you possibly stop and go to maintenance, where maybe you're not tracking, hopefully tracking-ish at the most, but ideally you'd be kind of intuitive eating. Now, again, it is a tool. And sometimes tools work really freaking well for people, and it's not a big deal for them to continue using that forever and ever. But I will be honest that when I hear athletes tell me that they've been tracking macros for 10 years and things like that, and they still haven't reached their goals, that really kind of hurts my heart. So hopefully we can bring you some information today if that is you, and hopefully that will help you move along. So let's dig into some reminders before we actually get into the training. So first reminder, counting macros doesn't mean you need a restrictive plan, okay? So a lot of these reminders might be for someone that's new to counting macros and maybe has like a bad perception of it. But counting macros doesn't need to be restrictive, right? And that's one thing that is finally starting to come around in CrossFit circles, is that you actually need to eat, right? That's one thing that is absolutely not popular in CrossFit circles, which I love, is that a lot of people, actually I shouldn't say that completely, from what I've seen, I'm sure there are some out there that really want you on a restrictive diet, but we want you to eat, right? So you don't need to be super restrictive to lose weight. There's a little bit more complexity to it, and we can kind of dig into that, but it doesn't need to be a restrictive plan, right? Sometimes just capturing what you're eating and understanding where some of the weaknesses are is going to be the real game changer. Second, it isn't black and white. Something more in the middle might be best for you. So this kind of goes within the idea of maybe you don't need to track macros. Maybe it's a little bit too much for you at the moment, and it's really hard to go from doing nothing, doing whatever the fuck you want, to being super consistent, 100% on point with counting macros. maybe it's somewhere in the middle, right? And there's a couple of strategies that you can use, and we will talk about those later. Something like a food journal, or just tracking ish kind of thing, where maybe it's just like on weekends or just during the week, something like that that can help you not feel like you're totally overwhelmed, but can help you stay on track. Three, counting macros takes a stable food environment. All right. So, what I mean by a stable food environment is that consistency, the ability to spend time towards making it stable. So, like, for example, if you work in an office where you know you're going to be there from 9 to 5 every single day, you come home at 5, you do the WOD, you're back home at 6:30 or 7. And it's just very consistent. It's really easy to plan around. You know where you're going to be each day. You know that you have access to a microwave, a fridge, all that kind of stuff. That is a really ideal scenario for counting macros, because the more predictable that your schedule is, it's really easy to plan around that stuff. However, it's really hard to count macros when you have an unpredictable schedule. Maybe you work on site somewhere, or you're traveling a lot, or you're always in a different place, different office. Maybe you work I don't know, construction jobs. You're always like different places. Not that it can't be done. You can still do it. It's just harder. Okay, so maybe take that into account when you're thinking about doing macros, or thinking about making some changes to your nutrition. Is that it might be really, really difficult given the situation. I'm not trying to give you guys an out or an excuse, because we have enough of those already, but it might play a role when you want to go from 0 to 100 real quick, that this could be really difficult. And maybe a more strategic approach by slowly introducing some habits would be easier in the long run. Number 4, this isn't a long-term strategy. Like I mentioned in the beginning, I'm not a big fan of people counting macros forever. For some people, it's super easy. It doesn't stress them out or overwhelm them to count macros for a long period of time. So kudos to them. But I find those people are sometimes few and far between. For most of us, it's a chore. It's a struggle. It sucks, right? It can work, but it sucks. So I don't like the idea of it being a long-term strategy. I really like the idea of it being like a short-term thing that we're going to follow very consistently and intentionally for 3 to 4 months, and then we're going to stop once we've made some progress and reach our goals. Hopefully we do reach our goals. Number 5, humans are terrible at estimating, okay? People have been on record underestimating their calorie intake by as much as 1,500 calories, or I believe it was somewhere around 50%, right? So if they ate 2,000 calories on a daily basis, they said, I ate 2,000 calories, then they actually measured it like, no, it's more like 3,000. So when it comes to that, humans are really bad at estimating. I'm pretty sure the study that cited that actually included nutritionists who, for a living, worked with food and that kind of thing. So they understood that humans are really bad at estimating, and they still underestimated drastically. So it's just a lesson that we suck at estimating, right? We're very good at just kind of looking at it and kind of giving ourselves the benefit of the doubt, like, oh yeah, no, it's probably fine, when in fact it's all is not fine. So just take that into account, as well as once you start actually understanding that nutritional labels can be off by as much as like 10 to 15% in either direction, so that they can have more nutrients and more calories than they say, or they could have less. When you factor in those, hopefully it all shakes out in the end, but not only are estimates wrong, but labels are wrong as well. So even when things go perfect, seemingly perfect, they can also be quite off. So just another reminder that although we need to take it super seriously to estimate it, it's also, take it with a grain of salt, that it's not always going to be perfect. Number 6, if you are trying to find loopholes to fit in your desserts, your cheat meals, your bad habits, this ain't it. This is not the way to go, okay? If you come into counting macros trying to be dishonest, to find ways that you can lie to yourself and find holes in, that's not the way to do it. That's a really poor attitude. You have to come in with the honesty to say, I'm going to track what I eat, and that's that, right? We're going to find a way to make it work. I'm not going to try to find loopholes in the system and things like that. You will have cheat meals, you will have dessert, and that's not a big deal, but the idea is that it is not a big deal, so you don't need to find loopholes and things around it. But typically coming in with that type of attitude of, oh, I need to find a way to make sure that I can have a treat every single day. It's like, sometimes you can make that work, but also sometimes it's a really bad way to approach things, that you want to try your best. And there's nothing wrong with the treat here and there, of course, but always trying to fit in the worst foods as possible just to make sure that you stay sane. Not always the best approach either. And lastly, Food is eaten in context, and macros do not account for that. Okay, so food is just made up of the physical properties that we need to survive. Food is memories, food is pleasure, and food is pain. So there's all kinds of things associated with food. You know, you go out and have a social time. It's not just the macros, it is the memories that you had. It doesn't account for the amount of fun that you had going out for dinner or having beers with your friends. So although it's really good to capture the quantity of food that you eat, things like memories, the emotions, the context, the social stuff with food is also really important. So don't discount that, in that it's not all about the quantity. You know, and as a nutrition coach, it's difficult to say that, because when it comes to energy balance, making sure that you have less energy taken in than put out to make sure that you do lose weight, it is about the quantity a lot of the time. However, like, humans are way more complex than that. So you have to factor in the social stuff, you have to factor in the psychology behind it, because we're not just energy balance equation, right? There's more to us than that. So let's get started. So here quickly, I just wanted to talk about what you need to get started. Okay. So there's two things you need. You need a food scale and you need a fitness tracker. Now, there's a couple more things that you possibly need than a food scale. You probably need things like measuring cups, things like that. If you don't have those type of utensils, most households do. But if you don't, those would be really handy. They're not a requirement, but they are super helpful. So think about getting those as well, but a food scale is absolutely imperative, right? The second thing would be some type of macro calculator or macro tracker. Most people use MyFitnessPal, but it's kind of been weird lately because they put their scanning thing behind a paywall, so it's a little more clunky to use. There's lots of ads, but it is the most popular. There's a couple of other ones out there like MyPlate. The one that I use is Carbon. They don't have a free version of Carbon, but it is really nice and really nice UI. So take that with a grain of salt. But MyFitnessPal is typically the most popular one. So we'll have to track something. So those are all the tools that you really need to get started. However, there's a couple of bonus features that I think are really important when it comes to counting macros that a lot of people overlook and don't understand the importance behind. So the first bonus is hands. All right, so this is a really weird one that a lot of people don't know about. It's hand portion control. So there's all kinds of different, essentially methods of tracking or counting macros using your hands. So for example, a palm of protein right here, a fistful of vegetables, a cupped hand of carbs, and a thumb of fat, right? So a palm of protein is about 20 to 30 grams. Cupped hand of carbs is 20 to 30 grams. A thumb of fats is about 7 to 12 grams of fat. So that's a good way to track it. And why this would be really important is, let's say you're on the go. Maybe, you're at a friend's house and they're serving you dinner. It's like, obviously you don't have your scale, you don't have everything weighed out or anything like that. This is a good way to kind of estimate. Instead of just saying, fuck it, this day's lost, you can just kind of roughly take a mental note of it, or maybe even take up your own servings and just kind of count it out that way. It's not perfect, right? Because obviously there are some proteins out there that aren't going to be solely protein. So like chicken is a good example of something that's, if you're having chicken, it's pretty much protein, right? But if you have like a fatty red meat, that's not going to be just protein. There's going to be a lot of fats in there. So that doesn't account for the, if maybe it's a palm full of protein, but there's going to be a lot more fats and other calories in there. So it's not a perfect solution, but I find it's a really good middle ground of just whether you're out and about or you have something on the go, you can kind of do that to build your own plate. It's a great little tool to use, okay? Second one is your phone camera. Take a picture of the food that you're eating. So again, if you're on the go, say if you're out to dinner and you're like, oh geez, like I'm not going to bring out my scale and weigh this stuff, or maybe I don't even want to put my hands next to it because that's kind of weird. Take a picture of the food. It takes 3 seconds and you can estimate later. Maybe if you want to be a little bit pro, you can take a picture of the food with your hand next to it. So then you can say, okay, that looks to be about like 2 palmfuls of protein, and just make those extrapolations so that you can kind of at least guess instead of just saying this whole night was lost. And actually, before we even get to the point of counting macros, maybe those tools alone will end up being something that you can use instead of tracking, because it's hard to tell whether tracking macros and having some magic numbers that just work for you is like the magic bullet or the silver bullet that kind of just does it for you, or is it that because you're tracking and having to be accountable for what you eat, you just stop eating like an asshole. So like maybe the combination of taking pictures and doing like a food journal or something like that could be enough to get you to where you want to be, because maybe you know that just snacking is the problem for you, right? So either way, let's get into macros now. So macros is short for macronutrients. All right, there are three macronutrients. You have protein, carbs, and fats that we focus on because they are the major categories of nutrients for food. We can also get into micronutrients, but typically there's so many and it's so hard to count and keep track of. Most people don't look at their micronutrient. So food is made up of all kinds of different nutrients, vitamins, and minerals, but they all kind of fall under those three categories loosely. All right, so first we have protein. And one thing about this training as well, is this makes it so awesome, is that both for the protein, for the carbs, and for the fats, there's attached ultimate guides for each one of those, which you can open and we'll actually have like a 12-15 page document all about that macro. Okay, so there's a whole lot more training dug within this that's actually gonna be super helpful for you as well. So so if you want to know more about protein, some of the big stuff, then you can go in there and have a look as well. Excuse me. So protein is absolutely the king of macronutrient. All right, it's an important building block for your body. That's often people just get away just tracking protein intake. A lot of people that do track, they actually don't even track anything else. They just go, I'm going to track my protein. Everything else will take care of itself. Okay, so 1 gram of protein is equal to roughly 4 calories. So if you eat 100 grams of protein, assuming that it's lean protein, that would be about 400 calories. There are 3 types of protein, or 3 types of amino acids that make up protein. You have your non-essential amino acids, essential amino acids, and conditionally essential amino acids. You also have kind of like a 4th type that are branched chain amino acids, but they kind of fall within some of these as well. So I typically don't talk about BCAAs too much, but essential amino acids basically come from protein, and that whole process will actually be explained in the Ultimate Protein Guide. So how much protein should we get on a daily basis? My coaching answer sometimes, depending if you're tracking or not, is as much as you can get. The more protein, the better. But typically what you would say would be, if you're trying to be strategic about it, would be 0.8 to 1.2 grams per pound of body weight. So if you're 200 pounds, somewhere between 160 to 220 would probably be somewhere you want to ballpark. Sometimes it depends if you're, what your situation is, what your activities are, how much you train, that kind of thing. But typically around 1 gram per pound of body weight is a good target to shoot for. Okay. Maybe if you're a really avid CrossFitter, you should look at getting more, because we do put our bodies through a lot of almost trauma in a way. So there's nothing wrong with more protein. Next is carbs. So same thing as carbs or as protein. You have 1 gram of carbs is equal to about 4 calories. Okay. I consider carbs kind of the queen to the king of protein, in that there may be there's a lot of contention out there whether they're necessary or not for training. I would say they're helpful, maybe not necessary. They're necessary for a lot of people, but not necessary for everybody, because there's a lot of people that train on keto and low carb diets and things like that, but it's absolutely helpful for your training. I kind of consider carbs to be like the fuel for your training, so make sure that you do have that enough carbs for your training. Again, there's an ultimate guide here, so if you want to know more about carbs, just click on this and it'll get you access to that training. So there's a weird fact about carbs, and I feel like I need to bring this up because a lot of people actually don't know this, is that carbs are actually broken down in the mouth and are responsible for as much as 20% of digestion of some carbs. So you actually have an amylase in your saliva that begins to break down carbs. So remember, chew your carbs, okay? It's a really good thing. This is going to help with digestion, maybe help with some GI issues as well. How many carbs should we eat on a daily basis? This one depends a little bit more than protein, but I look to be about the same. If you ate 1 gram per pound of body weight of carbs, that's probably a good place to start. But if you're a CrossFitter and you do train a lot and you're pretty busy, I would consider looking at getting a little bit more, somewhere around 1.2 to 1.6 grams of carbs. Okay. Then we have fats. Okay. Fat is like the adopted child of the macronutrients, because it's typically ignored. It's not treated very well. A lot of people demonize fats still a little bit, and not so much that they're afraid of fats, is that we focus so much on protein, so much on carbs, that fats just get neglected. I kind of consider fats to be like the macronutrient that is responsible for longevity, long-term recovery, well-being, regulating your emotions, regulating your hormones, that kind of thing. So keep that in mind. But a lot of reasons as to why they're a little bit kind of ignored is that 1 gram of fat is about 9 calories. Okay. So that they are very calorie dense, but there's a reason for that, and it's all explained within the Ultimate Dietary Fat Guide. Okay, so you can crack that open, give you a little bit more insight into that. We typically, as CrossFitters, don't need to worry about trying to get enough fat. It's usually the other way around because we're so focused on protein and trying to get protein and carbs from different sources that almost always our bases for fat are usually covered. Okay, it's usually I'm trying to minimize it or keep it within under the threshold because we almost get too much of it sometimes. But you can take that to an extreme that you reduce your fats to such a degree that it ends up impacting your long-term recovery. So be careful with that. Again, but a lot of that is going to be explained in the Dietary Fat Guide as well. And I don't have time to get into each one of those trainings because they're about 10 to 12, I think, pages each. So if I did this, we would be here forever. All right. So I explained some things about tracking here. I'm not going to go through all of it because it's pretty kind of straightforward. If you're new to tracking, I suggest you go through this step by step to kind of get some idea about how to track. If you're not new to tracking, this is probably something you've done before and you're pretty familiar with. But a couple of reminders in here. First and foremost, one of the worst things that I think you could do when tracking macros is actually connecting MyFitnessPal or whatever to your workouts, so that on a day that you do, say you go to a CrossFit class and you burn 300 calories, that is then added to your total for the day so that you can eat 300 calories more. There's nothing wrong with looking at that from the aspect of like, okay, I worked out really hard today, I need extra fuel. That is great, and you can definitely do that. However, what I find happens to people is, if you're reading this, you're probably struggling with your nutrition, at least to some capacity. What I find happens is that we get into this compensatory method or behavior weird thing that we do where we kind of bargain with ourselves to say, okay, I see that I burned 300 calories, therefore I get to eat 300 calories more food. And typically when we do that, it's not like, hooray, I get to eat more chicken breast. It's usually like, finally I can have a donut and a half, and to account for that, right? Which is not really an unhealthy behavior. We need to watch out for that. So try to avoid that as much as possible. Again, when it comes to tracking as well, like tracking your workout trackers that track your caloric or your energy burn throughout the workout, those are really inaccurate sometimes. So it's not a good idea to use those as well, as they almost always overestimate the amount of calories that you burn. So if it says you burn 300 calories, then you eat a 300 calorie donut, you probably only burned like 150 or 200, and then you ate a 300 calorie donut. It's like, now you just ruined everything that you did for your workout. So I consider my exercise for the day to be bonus as to what I'm eating. All right. But again, if you do have a healthy, relationship with food and nutrition, if you do burn a lot of calories and you have a really good workout that you need to replenish with, you absolutely can, as long as it's done healthily and with good food. Okay, so we can skip through some of this. One important thing to call out is that using the My Meals foods and recipes function within MyFitnessPal or any other tracker for that matter is really important and is going to make your job a hell of a lot easier. All right, so what will happen is that you'll actually spend the time up front to put in your recipes of something that you eat very, consistently, maybe every day. So that way you don't have to worry about putting in the individual ingredients. The only thing you have to make sure is that you make it the same way every time. So the example that I use, I like to have as a kind of a mid-afternoon snack, I like to have a Greek yogurt with a scoop of protein and 2 rice cakes. All right. And I might actually add some PB in there. Sometimes not. I have 2 recipes for both, but essentially instead of putting in those 3 ingredients and doing it individually, I have it all packed out, that I use the same measurement every single time. 3 tablespoons, 1 scoop of protein, and then 2 rice cakes. It's all measured out. So I just go my protein mix in there super quick, takes 2 seconds to add instead of what would have been 30 seconds or a minute before. Again, when you're talking seconds, it's not that bad, but it makes it's so much easier to do that it's then reducing the resistance that I'm putting on tracking macros, and it makes it a whole lot easier to do. So just something to think about. Okay. There's a couple of methods in here that I wanted to talk about that make it a little bit easier to weigh your food. So first example, straight to scale. So obviously just weighing on the scale is super straightforward and easy to do. So in the picture, I have a slice of sourdough bread on a scale. Next one is pull off the top. I found this one to be a little bit more important. So if this is for things that are really hard to measure, like butter. Like obviously, if you take a scoop of butter, you're not gonna like put it on the scale because then there's a mess to clean up and all that kind of stuff. I'll put the actual thing on the scale. I'll pull off whatever's on the scale. What I'm gonna use, so I just use like the tip of my butter knife here to use a little bit. I see that the difference between 310 and 302, there's actually in milliliters, but I'm pretty sure they're the same because it's 1 milliliter equals 1 gram. But you see here, I use 8 grams of butter, right? So instead of trying to measure out the 8 grams of butter, I just took off the top and saw the difference was 8, so I used 8 grams. And then you can also build your food on the scale. So as you add ingredients, you just tare it. So the example I gave here was making scrambled eggs. So I go like 4 eggs was 107 grams. I wrote that down. I tared the scale, so I reset it back to 0. I then put in a handful of peppers, write it down, tear the scale, put in the hot sauce, write it down, tear the scale. Then I put in cheese and wrote it down, and it's done. So I don't have to tear the scale again. But the idea is that you're just capturing the change or the delta and everything you add, and therefore you know everything you had, and then you don't need to measure it out individually before you combine it. So that's probably the easiest way to do like a shake or something like that. If you're a big fan of protein shakes in the morning, that's a really good way to do that in the morning as well. So that's pretty much it. Like obviously there's a lot of content in here that I'm not going to go through. That's just the ins and outs of using MyFitnessPal. Most other trackers are very similar as well, so keep that in mind. If you want to track your or get a macro calculator to give you some ideas of what you should be shooting for, there's a link here for Precision Nutrition's macro calculator. So this will kind of give you an idea of where to start. This is the one that I like the most because it does take into account many factors about your lifestyle, and it'll give you a pretty good indicator of what you should be shooting for. So if you're tracking macros and you want to kind of like a second opinion, maybe use this link here to give you some idea of what you should be shooting for. All right. So at the end of the day, we just need to remember this, right? Just because we're tracking macros doesn't mean that we should get our other food behaviors. A lot of people will use this as like, oh, license to do whatever, right? Just because I'm tracking macros, I can kind of do whatever I want in other aspects. So that's not so. We still need to remember that we need to have really good habits when it comes to food. So although you're tracking macros, it's still good to eat mostly whole foods. Avoid processed foods. Stop eating takeout. Eat more at home. Do meal prep. Now, that's usually an outcome of tracking macros because what we find is really hard to track when you're eating out. It's really easy to, when you have control of your food, to then just track that. So that's kind of a byproduct, but it's a good thing to remember because a lot of fast food chains these days do put their nutrition information out there so you can track while eating McDonald's, right? Each meal should be protein focused. Most athletes struggle with getting protein in their diet. So trying to make the protein kind of the biggest portion of each meal is something that'd be really important. Fiber intake can be important as well. So we don't track that per se because it doesn't fall under the 3 macronutrients, but making sure that you do get enough fiber to make sure that you're satiated, your digestion is good. It's a really good thing to do as well. Be careful of your sugar intake. So sometimes we can get caught up in just those 3 macros that we don't look at our sugars, and we can have a really high sugar. Typically speaking, as long as you're under your calories, you can still lose weight, but we also don't want to have really high sugars. So that's just something else to think about. You should eat healthily even when out. Sometimes we get into this fuck it mode where we just say, okay, we're going to eat out, so we might as well make it good. So you then like completely go off the rails, and then maybe that turns into like your next meal is bad, the next day is bad, then you've fallen off for 3 or 4 days. So try to eat as healthy as possible. Maybe you're not going to make the perfect decision. Maybe you're not going to get you're going to skip on the burger bun and get like a lettuce wrap or something like that. Like we don't have to go to that degree, but you don't have to full send it either to the point where you regret everything you just ate. And also remember, and I think that's one of the most important things to take away, is that food is eaten in context. All right, not every decision you'll make is going to be perfect. Yeah, okay, you're going out and maybe it's like a wedding or something, or like once in a lifetime moment that you want to go enjoy. Fucking don't track, right? It's not that big of a deal. It's more about the progress and the consistency that you have over the 7 days than any one day or one meal. So remember that it's not the worst thing. And a lot of people or a lot of athletes that I do speak to, it's not really the macros that they have the issue with; it's the consistency. So do whatever you can to make sure that you're consistent long term. Any one day is not going to win, you know, win you your goals, or it's not going to kind of crush your progress. It is what it is, and the more consistent you are over a long period of time is going to be more important for you. So either way, this is it for the training. So if you want a little bit more information about going into the tracking and things like that, read through it. It's pretty straightforward, so I'm not gonna bore you with that. But that is this training. That is the Macro Hater's Guide to Tracking Macros. So hopefully this was helpful. If you have any questions, shoot me a DM or comment on the video below or whatever, and we'll make sure to answer your questions and get you sorted, as well as if you have any other questions about other trainings that we might have. Just talk to us. We can get you some more information, some more training, whatever you need to help you reach your goals. So thanks for watching this training, and I'll catch you in the next one.